The notification from my bank app made my blood freeze. Account balance $847.23. 3 days ago, it had been $47,000. My wedding fund, my emergency savings, everything I'd worked 6 years to build as a pediatric nurse, gone. I stared at the screen in my honeymoon suite bathroom while Marcus showered, steam fogging the mirror as my world collapsed around me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The transaction history showed 13 separate withdrawals over the past 72 hours, all authorized by someone with access to my account details. Each withdrawal was just under the daily limit, methodically planned to drain every cent without triggering automatic fraud alerts. My hands shook as I scrolled through the dates and times. The first withdrawal had occurred during our wedding ceremony, while I was walking down the aisle. My name is Sophia Chen, and I'm 28 years old. This is the story of how I discovered that my new mother-in-law had stolen my entire life savings, and how her smug declaration that family pays family's debts became the catalyst for the most calculated response of my life. What she didn't know was that 6 years of working night shifts in pediatric intensive care had taught me patience, precision, and the art of remaining calm under the most devastating pressure. I met Marcus at a hospital charity gala 2 years earlier. He was charming, successful, and genuinely kind to the children on my ward when he visited as part of his architectural firm's community outreach program. Our relationship developed slowly, built on genuine respect and shared values, or so I thought. He spoke about his mother, Patricia, with obvious affection, describing her as a retired real estate agent who'd raised him alone after his father's death when Marcus was 12. What he failed to mention were Patricia's financial troubles, her gambling addiction, and her belief that her son's marriage represented a solution to her mounting debts. I learned these details much later, when it was too late to protect myself from the elaborate con she'd been orchestrating from the moment Marcus brought me home to meet her. Our wedding had been modest but beautiful, held at the botanical gardens where Marcus had proposed. I'd paid for most of it myself, wanting to contribute equally to our new life together despite Marcus earning nearly twice my nursing salary. Patricia had been effusive in her praise of the arrangements, constantly complimenting my practical approach to wedding planning and my responsible financial habits. She'd asked countless questions about my savings, my investment strategies, and my long-term financial goals, questions I'd answered openly, believing I was building a relationship with my future mother-in-law. The morning after our wedding, while we were packing for our honeymoon in Cabo San Lucas, Patricia had called Marcus in tears. She'd locked herself out of her house, she claimed, and needed him to come help her get back inside. Marcus was torn between helping his mother and catching our flight, so I suggested he go while I finished packing and met him at the airport. It was during those 2 hours alone in our apartment that Patricia had called me directly. "Sophia, darling," her voice had been warm and grandmotherly over the phone. "I hate to bother you on your honeymoon departure day, but I'm having the most terrible time with my online banking. My neighbor's granddaughter usually helps me, but she's away at college. Could you possibly walk me through setting up my account access on my new tablet? I know you're so good with technology." I should have been suspicious. I should have asked why she couldn't wait for Marcus to return. Instead, I spent 40 minutes on the phone with her, helping her navigate what I believed was her own banking website. She'd been convincing, asking me to read back confirmation numbers and security codes to ensure she was entering them correctly. What I was actually doing was providing her with access to my own accounts, watching her screen share session where she'd carefully replicated my bank's login page. By the time Marcus returned from his mother's house, slightly irritated that she'd simply forgotten her keys were in her purse the entire time, Patricia had gained complete access to my financial information. We caught our flight to Mexico, and I didn't check my bank balance until 3 days into our honeymoon, confident that my automatic payments and careful budgeting meant everything would continue running smoothly while I was away. The discovery of my empty accounts happened on a Thursday morning. Marcus had gone for an early swim, and I was trying to book a spa appointment when my card was declined. Initially, I assumed it was a foreign transaction issue, but something nagged at me enough to check my banking app. The sight of my depleted balance sent me into a panic that I struggled to contain. My first instinct was to call the bank's fraud hotline, but as I reviewed the transaction details more carefully, a horrifying pattern emerged. The withdrawals had been made from ATMs in Patricia's neighborhood, at times when she would typically be running errands. The amounts were precisely calculated to avoid triggering automatic security protocols, suggesting someone with knowledge of banking procedures. Most damning of all, the transactions had been completed using information that only someone with access to my complete financial profile could have obtained. When Marcus returned from his swim, I was sitting on our balcony staring at my phone with the bank's customer service line still connecting. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, recognizing the expression on my face from my worst days at the hospital. "Someone has stolen all of our money," I said quietly, holding up my phone to show him the balance. Every penny I had saved for our future, for the house down payment, for emergencies, it's all gone. Marcus went through the same stages I had experienced: disbelief, then anger, then the practical questions about how this could have happened. We spent the next 2 hours on international phone calls with my bank, filing fraud reports and requesting emergency account freezes. The bank representative was professional but not optimistic about immediate recovery of the funds, explaining that because the transactions appeared to have been authorized using my own security credentials, the investigation could take several weeks or months. It wasn't until we were discussing the timeline of the thefts that Marcus grew quiet. "The first withdrawal was during our wedding ceremony," he said slowly, reading from my phone screen. "Yes, at exactly 2:47 p.m. on Saturday. Mom called me that morning about being locked out. She had me come over right when we should have been getting ready together." I watched the realization dawn on his face, the same sick understanding that had been growing in my stomach since I'd first seen those transaction locations. "Marcus," I said gently, "I need to tell you about the phone call your mother made to me while you were at her house." When I finished explaining the banking assistance I'd provided to Patricia, Marcus was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "She's done things before, financial things. When I was in college, she borrowed money from my student loan refunds without telling me. When I started my business, she used my credit information to open accounts for herself. I thought she'd stopped when I got older and started monitoring everything more carefully." "Why didn't you warn me?" I asked, trying to keep accusation out of my voice. "Because I thought she had stopped. Because I wanted to believe she'd changed. Because I was ashamed of having a mother who would steal from her own son, and I couldn't bear the thought of you knowing that about my family." He buried his face in his hands. "I'm so sorry, Sophia. I never thought she would target you directly." We cut our honeymoon short and flew home the next day. The flight gave me 8 hours to think, to plan, and to decide how I wanted to handle the situation. Marcus was devastated, torn between loyalty to his mother and fury at her betrayal of me. He wanted to confront her immediately, to demand she return the money and face consequences for her actions. But I had a different idea forming, one that would require patience and precision. Working in pediatric intensive care had taught me that the most effective interventions are rarely the most dramatic ones. The best outcomes come from careful assessment, strategic planning, and methodical implementation of solutions. Patricia had planned her theft with surgical precision, and I intended to respond with the same level of calculated care. Our first stop after landing was the police station, where we filed a formal report for identity theft and fraud. The detective assigned to our case was sympathetic but realistic about our chances of immediate resolution. "Family fraud cases are complicated," he explained. "Even when we can prove what happened, getting restitution can be difficult if the perpetrator has already spent the money." From the police station, we drove directly to Patricia's house in the suburban neighborhood where Marcus had grown up. I had visited only a handful of times during our relationship, always for brief holiday meals or birthday celebrations. The house was a modest ranch-style home with a well-maintained garden and a late-model sedan in the driveway. Nothing about Patricia's lifestyle had suggested financial distress, which should have been my first warning sign. Patricia answered the door wearing a flowing silk blouse and designer jewelry I'd never seen before. Her smile faltered slightly when she saw our serious expressions, but she recovered quickly and invited us in with theatrical enthusiasm. What a wonderful surprise! How was the honeymoon? You both look so tan and relaxed. Marcus cut straight to the point. Mom, we need to talk about Sophia's bank account. Patricia's performance was Oscar-worthy. Her confusion appeared genuine as Marcus explained what had happened, and her shock and sympathy seemed heartfelt as I described discovering the theft. She gasped at appropriate moments, expressed outrage at the violation of our privacy, and offered to help us contact additional authorities or investigate potential suspects. Have you considered that someone might have hacked your phone during the wedding? She suggested. I read about criminals who target public events to steal personal information from guests. It was a clever deflection, plausible enough to plant doubt, while simultaneously positioning herself as a helpful ally in our investigation. If I hadn't been absolutely certain of her guilt, I might have been convinced by her performance. Instead, I watched her carefully, noting the subtle tells that betrayed her deception. The way she avoided direct eye contact when discussing the timeline. The slight tremor in her voice when Marcus mentioned the specific ATM locations. The defensive positioning of her body when I described the banking assistant's phone call. Patricia, I said calmly, that's exactly the kind of creative thinking we need right now. You're so knowledgeable about financial matters. Maybe you could help us understand how someone would go about accessing account information in the first place. She practically preened at the compliment, launching into a detailed explanation of various fraud methods that demonstrated far more knowledge than a typical victim would possess. As she talked, I noticed other things. The expensive jewelry I'd never seen before, the new furniture in her living room, the stack of paid bills on her kitchen counter, including what appeared to be a significant credit card payment. After an hour of listening to Patricia's theories and suggestions, Marcus and I left with promises to keep her updated on the investigation. In the car, Marcus was quiet until we'd driven several blocks away from his mother's house. She did it, didn't she? He said finally. Yes. How can you be so certain? Because she knew too much about how the fraud was executed. Because she suggested specific alternative explanations that would direct suspicion away from family members. Because she's wearing jewelry and living in a style that doesn't match her supposed financial situation. I paused, watching his face. And because when I mentioned the banking assistant's call, she didn't ask any follow-up questions about it. An innocent person would have been curious about those details. Marcus was quiet for the rest of the drive home. That evening, he called his mother and asked directly if she had taken money from my accounts. According to Marcus, her response was immediate and angry denial, followed by hurt accusations that her own son would suspect her of such a thing. She hung up on him, which Marcus interpreted as guilt, but which I recognized as a calculated move to end the conversation before she could be pressed for more details. The next morning, Patricia called me directly while Marcus was at work. Her tone was completely different from the concerned mother-in-law act she'd performed the day before. There was steel in her voice and a confidence that suggested she believed she held all the power in our situation. Sophia, dear, I think we need to have a conversation about this unfortunate misunderstanding, she began. What kind of conversation? The kind where we discuss what's best for everyone involved, including my son. Marcus has always been sensitive about family conflict. It would be such a shame if this situation caused problems in your new marriage. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Patricia was suggesting that pursuing the theft investigation would somehow damage my relationship with Marcus, and that the wise choice would be to let the matter drop. It was a calculated psychological manipulation designed to make me complicit in my own victimization. Patricia, I'm not sure I understand what you're suggesting. I'm suggesting that sometimes family members help each other through difficult financial situations. I'm suggesting that the money you think was stolen was actually a loan, given freely to help a family member in crisis. I'm suggesting that creating a police investigation over a misunderstanding could have consequences that hurt everyone involved. I felt my blood pressure rising, but I kept my voice steady. Are you saying you took money from my accounts? I'm saying that family helps family, and sometimes that help gets misunderstood by people who haven't learned how real families work yet. Her voice took on a condescending tone. You come from a different background, dear. Your parents saved money for their own individual goals, instead of understanding that family resources should be shared for the greater good. Now that you've married Marcus, you'll need to learn how things work in our family. The audacity was breathtaking. Patricia wasn't just admitting to the theft, she was reframing it as my failure to understand family values. She was suggesting that my money had always belonged to the family unit, and that my shock at its disappearance revealed my selfish and individualistic worldview. So you did take the money. I used family resources to address family debts. Marcus will inherit everything I have someday anyway, so what's the difference if some of that inheritance gets accessed a little early to solve pressing problems? The difference is that it wasn't Marcus's money, it was mine. Patricia's laugh was genuinely amused. Darling, you're married now. There's no yours and his anymore. There's just family money and family responsibilities. I had responsibilities that needed to be addressed, so I addressed them using family resources. That's how real families work. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Patricia alternating between condescending explanations of family dynamics and subtle threats about the consequences of pursuing legal action. By the end, she had made several things crystal clear. She had deliberately targeted my savings to pay her gambling debts. She believed her actions were justified because I was now part of her family system. She had no intention of returning the money voluntarily. And she was confident that I wouldn't pursue serious consequences because doing so would create conflict in my marriage. What Patricia didn't know was that our entire conversation was being recorded on my phone, legally admissible in our state as long as one party to the conversation consented to the recording. She also didn't know about my background in crisis management, gained through years of dealing with life and death situations in pediatric care. Most importantly, she didn't know that her psychological manipulation tactics were actually strengthening my resolve rather than weakening it. After Patricia hung up, I sat in my kitchen making careful notes about everything she had said. Her admission of guilt was clear and unambiguous. Her reasoning revealed a sophisticated understanding of financial manipulation. Her threats demonstrated consciousness of guilt, and her confident assumption that I would submit to her authority showed that she had seriously underestimated the person she had chosen to target. I spent the afternoon researching Patricia's financial situation using public records and online databases. What I discovered painted a picture of someone who had been living beyond her means for years. Multiple credit cards in default, a second mortgage on her house taken out 18 months earlier, a pattern of civil judgments for unpaid debts going back nearly a decade. Patricia wasn't just an opportunistic thief, she was a desperate one, and desperate people make increasingly reckless decisions when their backs are against the wall. When Marcus came home from work, I played him the recording of my conversation with his mother. Watching his face as he listened to Patricia's casual admission of guilt and her condescending explanation of family financial dynamics was heartbreaking. This was his mother, the woman who had raised him, revealing herself to be someone he didn't recognize. She really believes what she's saying, he said when the recording ended. She genuinely thinks she was entitled to take your money. Yes, and that belief system is going to be her downfall. What do you mean? I showed him my research into Patricia's financial situation, explaining the pattern of debt and default that painted a picture of someone in serious financial crisis. She didn't steal my money on impulse, Marcus. This was planned and calculated, probably for months. She's been studying our relationship, learning about my financial habits, waiting for the right opportunity to access my accounts. So what do we do now? We give her exactly what she wants. Marcus looked confused, so I continued. She wants me to accept that family resources should be shared for family debts. She wants me to understand that her financial problems are now my financial problems. She wants me to stop pursuing legal action because it would be disruptive to family harmony. I smiled, feeling the first stirrings of satisfaction since this nightmare had begun. So I'm going to embrace that family philosophy completely. Over the next week, I implemented a plan that was as methodical as Patricia's theft had been, but with a crucial difference. Everything I did was completely legal, thoroughly documented, and designed to give Patricia exactly what she claimed to want: a family that shared financial responsibilities. My first step was to hire a private investigator specializing in financial crimes. Patricia's pattern of debt and default suggested that her financial problems extended far beyond what public records revealed, and I wanted a complete picture of her situation before taking action. The investigator was able to uncover the full scope of Patricia's gambling addiction, including debts to private lenders and evidence of other fraudulent activities targeting family members and acquaintances. While the investigator worked, I focused on legal strategies. The recording of Patricia's admission provided clear evidence for criminal charges, but I was more interested in civil remedies that would provide faster and more certain recovery of my stolen funds. I consulted with attorneys specializing in elder fraud, financial abuse, and civil restitution cases. The legal consultation revealed several interesting options. Because Patricia had used my identity and financial information without permission, I could pursue charges for identity theft, computer fraud, and wire fraud. The fact that she had planned and executed the theft over multiple days demonstrated criminal intent rather than a momentary lapse in judgment. Most importantly, because she had admitted to the theft and expressed no remorse or intention to make restitution, the case was likely to result in both criminal conviction and civil judgment. However, the attorneys warned that collecting on a civil judgment could be difficult if Patricia had already spent the money or hidden assets. This was where my research into her financial situation became crucial. Patricia wasn't just financially irresponsible, she was sophisticated about hiding assets and manipulating family members to avoid consequences for her actions. My next step was to implement what I privately called the family sharing plan. If Patricia believed that family resources should be shared to address family debts, then she should be delighted to learn that I was embracing this philosophy wholeheartedly. I began by contacting every creditor and collection agency that had been pursuing Patricia for unpaid debts. Using the public records I had gathered and the additional information provided by my private investigator, I was able to compile a comprehensive list of Patricia's financial obligations. The total was staggering: nearly $180,000 in credit card debt, personal loans, gambling debts, and civil judgments. To each creditor, I sent a carefully worded letter explaining that I was Patricia's new daughter-in-law and that I had recently learned about her financial difficulties. I expressed concern about her situation and asked to be kept informed about the status of her accounts as family members who might be in a position to help address her debts. This wasn't just courtesy, it established me as an interested party in Patricia's financial affairs, giving me legal standing to receive information about her asset recovery efforts and debt collection activities. The response was immediate and illuminating. Several creditors were eager to share information about Patricia's payment history, her attempts to avoid collection efforts, and her pattern of making promises she didn't keep. One collection agency informed me that Patricia had recently made significant payments on accounts that had been dormant for months, payments that coincided perfectly with her theft from my accounts. Armed with this information, I was able to provide law enforcement and my attorneys with a detailed timeline showing how Patricia had used my stolen money to temporarily satisfy her most pressing debts. This established clear evidence of the money trail and demonstrated that Patricia had planned the theft as part of a broader strategy to address her financial crisis. The next phase of my plan involved what I called family financial planning. Since Patricia believed that family resources should be managed collectively, I decided to help her implement this philosophy more systematically. I researched Patricia's mortgage situation and discovered that she was behind on payments, despite having made the recent debt payments to other creditors. This suggested that she was prioritizing certain debts over others, probably based on which creditors were most aggressive in their collection efforts. I also learned that her house was her primary asset, with equity that could potentially be used to satisfy judgments against her. I contacted Patricia's mortgage company and explained that I was concerned about my mother-in-law's ability to maintain her home payments given her recent financial difficulties. I asked to be added as an authorized contact on the account, citing my concern as a family member who might need to assist with payments if Patricia became unable to manage them herself.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The mortgage company was surprisingly receptive to this request, especially when I explained that Patricia had recently acknowledged using family resources to address her debts and had expressed appreciation for family assistance with financial management. They added me as an authorized contact, which gave me access to information about Patricia's payment status and any collection activities related to her mortgage. This same strategy worked with Patricia's utility companies, insurance providers, and other service companies. In each case, I positioned myself as a concerned family member who wanted to help Patricia manage her finances more effectively. The consistent message was that Patricia had acknowledged the appropriateness of family involvement in financial decisions and had welcomed assistance from her new daughter-in-law. Within 2 weeks, I had established myself as an authorized contact or interested party for virtually every aspect of Patricia's financial life. This wasn't illegal or unethical. I was simply embracing the family financial philosophy that Patricia had articulated so clearly during our phone conversation. The real brilliance of this approach became apparent when Patricia began receiving calls from various companies asking about the family member who had recently contacted them about her accounts. She called me in a panic, demanding to know why I had been contacting her creditors and service providers. "I'm embracing the family financial philosophy you explained to me," I said calmly. "You made it clear that family resources should be shared to address family debts, and I wanted to make sure I understood the full scope of our family's financial responsibilities." "You have no right to interfere with my personal business." "But Patricia, you explained that there's no such thing as personal business in a real family. You said that family resources should be managed collectively for the greater good. I'm simply trying to understand how much help our family needs so that Marcus and I can plan our contributions accordingly." The conversation deteriorated quickly as Patricia realized that her own words were being used to justify actions she hadn't anticipated. She had expected me to quietly absorb the loss of my savings and accept her explanation about family financial dynamics. She hadn't expected me to embrace those dynamics so enthusiastically that I became actively involved in managing her debt situation. "You're doing this to embarrass me," she accused. "I'm doing this to help our family address our collective financial responsibilities," I replied. "Isn't that what you wanted?" Patricia hung up on me, but the damage was already done. Every creditor and service provider in her life now knew that her family was aware of her financial situation and was actively involved in monitoring her accounts. This eliminated her ability to hide new debts or manipulate payment schedules without family knowledge. It also established a paper trail showing that she had previously claimed family involvement in financial decisions, which would be useful if she later tried to deny her admission of stealing my money. The most satisfying aspect of this strategy was that it was completely defensive. I wasn't attacking Patricia or trying to harm her. I was simply accepting her stated philosophy about family financial management and implementing it systematically. If she objected to my involvement, she would have to explain why her philosophy applied when she wanted access to my money, but didn't apply when I wanted information about family debts. As the weeks progressed, the pressure on Patricia intensified from multiple directions. The police investigation was moving forward with clear evidence of identity theft and fraud. My private investigator had uncovered additional evidence of Patricia's pattern of financial manipulation targeting other family members and friends. The creditors who had been pursuing her for months now had a reliable contact person who was committed to ensuring that family debts were addressed appropriately. Most importantly, Patricia's relationship with Marcus was deteriorating as he processed the full scope of his mother's deception. The woman who had raised him, whom he had loved and trusted despite her past financial problems, had not only stolen from his wife, but had shown no remorse and had actually tried to justify her actions as appropriate family behavior. Marcus initially struggled with divided loyalties, torn between his lifetime of love for his mother and his anger at her betrayal of me. But as more evidence emerged about the calculated nature of her theft and her pattern of manipulating family relationships for financial gain, his perspective shifted. He began to see Patricia not as a flawed but loving mother who had made a mistake, but as someone who had been systematically exploiting his love and trust for years. The turning point came when my private investigator discovered that Patricia had previously stolen money from Marcus's college fund to pay gambling debts, then had convinced him that the college fund shortfall was due to poor investment performance by the bank. Marcus had felt guilty for years about being financially irresponsible in college, when in reality he had been the victim of his mother's theft, just as I was now. "She's been doing this my entire adult life," Marcus said after reviewing the investigator's report. "Every time I thought she was struggling financially because of circumstances beyond her control, she was actually stealing from me or someone else and then lying about what happened." It was during this period of growing evidence and mounting pressure that Patricia made her crucial mistake. Instead of accepting responsibility and working toward restitution, she doubled down on her original strategy of manipulation and deflection. She began calling Marcus daily with elaborate theories about who might have really stolen my money. She suggested that I might have taken the money myself and blamed her to cover up my own financial irresponsibility. She even hinted that my cultural background made me inherently untrustworthy with money, revealing an ugly prejudice that shocked Marcus more than her theft had. These increasingly desperate attempts at manipulation only served to strengthen the case against her while simultaneously destroying her relationship with Marcus. Each conversation was recorded, providing additional evidence of her consciousness of guilt and her willingness to make false accusations to avoid consequences for her actions. The final confrontation came 6 weeks after our return from our honeymoon. Patricia called and demanded a family meeting to resolve this misunderstanding once and for all. She suggested that we meet at her house where she could present evidence that would prove her innocence and expose what she claimed was a conspiracy against her. Marcus and I agreed to the meeting, but we came prepared. I brought my attorney, who had advised me that Patricia's invitation to present her defense could provide an opportunity to obtain additional admissions that would strengthen our case. I also brought a court reporter, explaining to Patricia that since she had previously expressed concern about being misunderstood, it would be helpful to have an official record of our conversation. Patricia was clearly flustered by the formal nature of the meeting, but she was too committed to her strategy of manipulation to back down. For over an hour, she presented an elaborate theory involving identity theft, banking errors, and a conspiracy by my family to frame her for crimes she didn't commit. Her presentation was detailed and creative, but it contradicted both the physical evidence and her previous admissions. When she finished, my attorney asked a series of simple questions about the timeline of events and Patricia's knowledge of my financial information. Her answers revealed inconsistencies and contradictions that made her innocence claims impossible to believe. Most damaging, she was unable to explain how an outside identity thief could have gained access to information that only someone present during our phone conversation. The meeting concluded with Patricia making one final offer. She would forgive my accusations against her if I agreed to drop all legal proceedings and promise never to discuss the matter with anyone outside the immediate family. In exchange, she would provide financial counseling to help Marcus and I better manage our money in the future.
The audacity of this offer was stunning, even by Patricia's standards. She was proposing to forgive me for accurately accusing her of theft while offering to teach financial management to the victims of her own financial crimes. It was such an obvious admission of guilt disguised as magnanimous forgiveness that even she seemed to realize she had overplayed her hand. "Patricia," I said calmly, "I appreciate your offer to provide financial counseling, but I think we'll need to focus on recovering the money you took from my accounts first." "I haven't taken any money from your accounts." "Yes, you have. You admitted it during our phone conversation 6 weeks ago, which was recorded. You explained that family resources should be shared to address family debts, and you described using my savings to pay your gambling debts as an appropriate family financial decision." Patricia's face went white as she realized the implications of what I'd just said. Not only had her theft been recorded, but her admission had been made in the presence of witnesses who could testify about her statements. The elaborate defense she had just presented was contradicted by her own previous admission of guilt. "That conversation was private," she said weakly. "It was a conversation between family members about family finances," I replied. "According to your own philosophy, there should be no secrets about financial matters between family members." The meeting ended with Patricia refusing to discuss restitution and my attorney explaining the next steps in both the criminal prosecution and civil recovery process. As we left her house, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with revenge or vindication. I had simply refused to be victimized and had used Patricia's own stated values to hold her accountable for her actions. The legal proceedings that followed were almost anticlimactic. Patricia's admission, combined with the financial evidence and the testimony of witnesses, resulted in a quick guilty plea on criminal charges and a civil judgment for full restitution plus damages. The court ordered her to sell her house to satisfy the judgment, which provided funds to repay not only my stolen money, but also restitution to other family members and friends who had been victims of her previous thefts. Patricia served 6 months in jail and was ordered to attend gambling addiction counseling and financial management classes. More importantly, she was required to have no contact with Marcus or me except through attorneys, ending her ability to continue manipulating family relationships for personal gain. The most significant outcome wasn't financial recovery or legal victory, it was the restoration of truth to a relationship that had been built on deception. Marcus was able to process the reality of his mother's behavior and begin healing from a lifetime of manipulation. Our marriage, which could have been destroyed by Patricia's theft and manipulation, became stronger as we worked together to address the crisis she had created. 6 months after Patricia's conviction, Marcus and I bought our first house, using the recovered funds combined with our savings. We established clear boundaries around family financial involvement and developed systems to protect ourselves from future manipulation. Most importantly, we learned to recognize and respond to attempts at psychological manipulation, skills that have served us well in other areas of our lives. Patricia occasionally attempts to contact us through intermediaries, usually around holidays or family events. Her messages typically follow the same pattern: expressions of remorse, followed by suggestions that family harmony is more important than holding grudges, followed by hints that she has learned her lesson and deserves forgiveness. We don't respond to these attempts, having learned that engagement only provides her with opportunities to refine her manipulation strategies. The experience taught me several valuable lessons about financial abuse, family manipulation, and the importance of documenting everything when dealing with people who distort reality for personal gain. Most importantly, it taught me that the most effective response to manipulation is not anger or emotional confrontation, but methodical documentation and strategic use of the manipulator's own words and actions against them. If you're dealing with family financial abuse, know this: the people who steal from you will often try to make you feel guilty for holding them accountable. They'll claim that family loyalty means accepting their behavior and that pursuing consequences will damage family relationships. This is manipulation designed to make you complicit in your own victimization. Real family relationships are built on trust, respect, and mutual support. They don't require you to sacrifice your financial security to enable someone else's irresponsible or criminal behavior. You have the right to protect yourself, to seek legal remedies, and to establish boundaries that prevent future abuse. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a family member is to hold them accountable for their actions, even when they resist taking responsibility. Enabling destructive behavior doesn't help anyone. It only ensures that the behavior will continue and escalate. Your financial security matters, your right to honest relationships matters, and no one, regardless of their family status, has the right to steal from you and then demand that you accept their theft as evidence of family loyalty. The money Patricia stole was important, but what she really tried to take was my agency, my right to make decisions about my own life, and my ability to trust my own perceptions of reality. Recovering the money was satisfying, but refusing to let her redefine reality to suit her needs was transformative. If someone is trying to convince you that your reaction to their harmful behavior is the real problem, pay attention to that manipulation tactic. If someone claims that holding them accountable will damage your relationship, consider whether a relationship that requires you to accept harm is worth preserving. You have the right to protect yourself, to seek justice, and to refuse to participate in your own victimization, even when the victimizer is someone you love. 3 months after Patricia's conviction, I thought our ordeal was finally over. The house sale had gone through, my stolen money was recovered with interest, and Marcus and I were settling into our new home with carefully constructed financial boundaries. I had returned to my normal schedule at the pediatric ward, grateful for the routine and the reminder that there were problems in the world that had nothing to do with family manipulation and financial abuse. That sense of normalcy shattered on a Tuesday morning when I received a call from Detective Rodriguez, the officer who had handled Patricia's case. His voice carried a tension that immediately put me on alert, the same tone I recognized from doctors delivering difficult news to families in my ward. Mrs. Chen, I need to inform you about some developments in the Patricia Wells case. We've discovered that your situation may not have been isolated. We're investigating what appears to be a broader pattern of financial fraud involving multiple victims across several states. The investigation had been triggered by Patricia's cellmate, a woman named Rebecca Torres, who was serving time for similar financial crimes. Rebecca had mentioned Patricia's sophisticated methods to a federal investigator, describing techniques that matched unsolved cases in Nevada, Arizona, and California. What started as casual jailhouse conversation had evolved into a multi-state investigation, revealing a network of people who shared strategies for targeting family members and exploiting relationship dynamics for financial gain. Are you saying Patricia was part of some kind of organized crime?
I asked, trying to process this information while standing in my hospital break room. Not exactly organized crime in the traditional sense, but definitely coordinated fraud. These individuals weren't working together directly, but they were sharing methods through online forums and informal networks. Patricia's techniques were more sophisticated than anything we typically see in family fraud cases, and now we understand why. The detective explained that investigators had found Patricia's communications with other individuals who specialized in what they called relationship fraud. These weren't random scams targeting strangers. They were calculated long-term strategies for identifying, grooming, and exploiting people who had emotional vulnerabilities related to family relationships. Patricia's choice of me as a target hadn't been opportunistic. It had been strategic, based on a profile of characteristics that made me particularly susceptible to her specific type of manipulation. As a healthcare worker, I was predisposed to trust and help others. As someone who had lost both parents in a car accident during college, I was emotionally invested in building strong family relationships. As a financially responsible person with significant savings, I represented a valuable target for someone with Patricia's particular skills. We need you to review some communications we've recovered from Patricia's computer, Detective Rodriguez continued. There are references to other potential victims, people who may be in situations similar to what you experienced. Your insights could help us identify and protect them. I agreed to meet with the detective that afternoon, but I was unprepared for what the recovered communications would reveal about the calculated nature of Patricia's campaign against me. The digital evidence painted a picture of someone who had studied relationship dynamics, financial psychology, and manipulation techniques with the dedication of a graduate student. Patricia's computer contained detailed notes about my personality, my financial habits, my work schedule, and my emotional responses to various situations. She had documented my reactions to family gatherings, my comments about wanting to build a strong relationship with Marcus's family, and my financial discussions with Marcus during the early months of our relationship. The notes read like a psychological profile, complete with assessments of my strengths, weaknesses, and potential points of vulnerability. More disturbing were Patricia's communications with other individuals who were implementing similar strategies. The conversations were clinical in their detachment, discussing victims as targets and assets while sharing techniques for maximizing financial extraction while minimizing the risk of detection or prosecution. One conversation thread focused specifically on healthcare worker targets, with Patricia sharing detailed observations about my profession's impact on my psychological vulnerabilities. She had noted that healthcare workers were trained to prioritize others' needs above their own, making them less likely to recognize manipulation tactics being used against them. She had also observed that people in high-stress medical jobs often sought emotional comfort in family relationships, making them more willing to overlook warning signs if those signs came from family members. "She studied you like a lab specimen," Detective Rodriguez said as I read through the communications. "Every interaction you had with her was being analyzed and documented for future use." The scope of Patricia's preparation was breathtaking in its thoroughness. She had researched my bank's security procedures, my workplace policies regarding financial emergencies, and even my family's cultural background to better understand how to frame her requests for assistance in ways that would appeal to my values and sense of obligation. Most chilling were the communications where Patricia discussed her long-term strategy for asset management after gaining access to my accounts. The plan hadn't been to steal everything at once. It had been to establish ongoing access that could be used repeatedly over time. The wedding theft was intended to be the first of many withdrawals, spaced strategically to avoid detection while gradually transferring my entire financial portfolio to her control. If you hadn't discovered the theft so quickly, she would have continued taking money for months or even years, the detective explained. The plan was to establish a pattern of financial assistance that would seem voluntary to outside observers. The federal investigation had also uncovered Patricia's involvement in coaching other individuals on similar schemes. She had been operating what amounted to a consulting service, helping other family members identify and exploit relatives with financial assets. Her expertise in manipulation techniques, combined with her knowledge of banking procedures and legal loopholes, had made her a valuable resource for people seeking to commit sophisticated family fraud. Reading through Patricia's coaching communications was like discovering the instruction manual for my own victimization. She had provided detailed guidance to other people about timing techniques for building trust, methods for obtaining financial information without arousing suspicion, and strategies for reframing theft as family assistance. The clinical precision of her advice revealed someone who viewed relationship manipulation as a professional skill rather than a moral failure. One particularly disturbing conversation involved Patricia advising someone on how to handle victims who discovered the theft and threatened legal action. Her recommendations included psychological manipulation techniques designed to make victims feel guilty for pursuing consequences, methods for isolating victims from potential support systems, and strategies for convincing family members that the victim was overreacting or lying about what had occurred. "I want to show you something else," Detective Rodriguez said, pulling up another set of communications. "These are conversations Patricia had about your case specifically after you started investigating her finances." The messages revealed Patricia's growing frustration and anxiety as my strategic response had disrupted her usual victim management techniques. She had expected me to react emotionally, to either accept her explanation about family financial dynamics or to create dramatic conflict that would make me appear unreasonable to other family members. My methodical documentation and strategic use of her own words against her had been unprecedented in her experience. Patricia had sought advice from her network about how to handle a victim who was fighting back intelligently rather than either submitting or reacting emotionally. The responses revealed that none of her associates had encountered a situation where a victim had turned the manipulator's own tactics against them so systematically. "She was actually asking for help because you were using her methods better than she was," the detective said with what might have been admiration. "Your approach disrupted every technique in her playbook." The federal investigation had identified 17 other victims across multiple states, with financial losses totaling over $800,000. The victims shared common characteristics. They were financially stable, emotionally invested in family relationships, and professionally successful in fields that required trust and empathy. Patricia and her associates had been specifically targeting people whose personal and professional backgrounds made them both valuable and vulnerable. Most of the other victims had never reported the thefts, either because they had been convinced by their perpetrators that family members shouldn't involve law enforcement in family matters, or because they had been isolated from support systems that might have encouraged them to seek help. Several victims had actually borrowed money to replace what had been stolen, taking on debt to avoid acknowledging that family members had victimized them. "We're hoping you'll consider working with us to reach out to some of these victims," Detective Rodriguez said. "Your experience and the way you handled your situation could help them understand their options and feel empowered to seek recovery." I agreed to participate in victim outreach, but I was unprepared for the emotional impact of speaking with people who had experienced similar manipulation. Each conversation revealed the devastating effectiveness of the psychological techniques Patricia and her associates employed. These weren't simple theft cases. They were systematic campaigns of emotional and financial abuse designed to leave victims feeling responsible for their own victimization. Sarah Martinez in Phoenix had lost $23,000 to her brother-in-law, who had convinced her that her financial success was creating family resentment and that sharing her resources would help heal family relationships.
When she discovered the theft, he had convinced other family members that Sarah was being selfish and materialistic, effectively isolating her from the support system she needed to address what had happened.
David Kim in Las Vegas had been targeted by his stepmother, who had gained access to his retirement accounts while he was deployed overseas with the military. She had framed the theft as managing his finances while he was away, and when he returned to discover his accounts had been drained, she had convinced his father that David was being ungrateful for the financial assistance she had provided during his deployment. Each victim's story revealed the same patterns: careful relationship building to establish trust, strategic information gathering to understand financial vulnerabilities, calculated exploitation that was framed as family assistance, and sophisticated psychological manipulation designed to prevent victims from seeking help or holding perpetrators accountable. The most heartbreaking aspect of these conversations was how each victim blamed themselves for being manipulated. They focused on signs they should have recognized, boundaries they should have maintained, and decisions they should have made differently. The shame and self-blame were often more destructive than the financial losses, creating lasting damage to their ability to trust their own judgment and form healthy relationships. My outreach work with other victims became an unexpected source of healing for my own experience. Helping them understand that sophisticated manipulation was designed to be undetectable helped me process my own feelings of embarrassment about being victimized by Patricia. Seeing their relief when they realized they weren't responsible for other people's criminal behavior reminded me that accountability belonged with the perpetrators, not the victims. The federal investigation also revealed that Patricia's network had been operating for nearly a decade, with some individuals specializing in different types of family fraud. There were experts in elderly parent scams, specialists in sibling financial manipulation, and consultants who focused on exploiting in-law relationships. The sophistication of their methods rivaled professional con artists, but their focus on family relationships had allowed them to operate with minimal detection. One of the most disturbing discoveries was the existence of online forums where family fraud perpetrators shared victim profiles, discussed successful techniques, and provided emotional support for each other's criminal activities. These forums operated under the guise of financial advice or family relationship counseling, but they were actually training grounds for increasingly sophisticated manipulation techniques. Patricia had been a moderator in several of these forums, providing guidance to newcomers and sharing case studies based on her successful frauds. Her theft from me had been documented in detail as an educational example for other forum members, complete with analysis of which techniques had worked and which had failed. Reading the forum discussions about my case was surreal. Forum members had analyzed my responses to Patricia's manipulation, debated strategies for handling victims who documented everything, and discussed methods for isolating victims from professional or legal support systems. My own experience had become a cautionary tale about the importance of thorough victim research and careful execution of manipulation techniques. The federal investigation had been monitoring these forums for months before Patricia's arrest, gathering evidence about the scope and sophistication of family fraud networks. The information collected would be used to prosecute additional cases and develop prevention programs to help potential victims recognize and respond to family financial manipulation. As part of my collaboration with the investigation, I was asked to participate in developing educational materials for financial institutions, law enforcement agencies, and victim advocacy organizations. My healthcare background and my experience as both a victim and a successful advocate for my own recovery provided valuable insights for professionals who needed to understand the psychological dynamics of family fraud. The educational work led to speaking opportunities at professional conferences and victim advocacy events. I found myself explaining the difference between family financial assistance and family financial abuse, helping audiences understand how perpetrators use emotional manipulation to frame theft as generosity, and providing guidance for recognizing the warning signs of sophisticated relationship fraud. These speaking engagements connected me with other professionals who were working to address family financial abuse. I learned about the scope of the problem, the barriers that prevented victims from seeking help, and the systemic changes needed to better protect vulnerable individuals from exploitation by family members. One particularly impactful conversation was with Dr. Elena Vasquez, a psychologist who specialized in family trauma and financial abuse. She explained how family fraud differed from other types of financial crime because it exploited the victim's deepest emotional vulnerabilities and created lasting damage to their ability to trust and form relationships. When a stranger scams you, you can tell yourself that you were unlucky or that the perpetrator was especially skilled, Dr. Vasquez explained. When a family member scams you, it calls into question your ability to judge character, your understanding of family relationships, and your basic assumptions about love and loyalty. The psychological impact of family fraud extended far beyond the financial losses. Victims often experienced symptoms similar to those seen in domestic violence cases: self-blame, isolation, difficulty trusting their own perceptions, and reluctance to seek help due to shame and embarrassment. Recovery required not just financial restitution, but also therapeutic support to address the emotional trauma. Dr. Vasquez's insights helped me understand my own healing process and the importance of the support I had received from Marcus, my legal team, and the law enforcement professionals who had taken my case seriously. Many victims never received that level of validation and support, leaving them to process the trauma of family betrayal without adequate resources. My collaboration with Dr. Vasquez led to the development of a support group program for family fraud victims. The groups provided a safe space for victims to share their experiences without judgment, learn about their legal options, and receive emotional support from others who understood the unique challenges of being victimized by family members. The support group work revealed patterns I hadn't recognized in my own experience. Many victims described feeling guilty about their financial success, as if having money somehow justified other people's decision to steal from them. Others talked about the pressure they felt to maintain family relationships even after being victimized, with extended family members suggesting that legal action was an overreaction that would damage family unity. These conversations helped me recognize how fortunate I had been to have Marcus's support throughout my experience with Patricia. Many victims faced additional pressure from spouses or partners who prioritized family harmony over accountability, leaving them to navigate the trauma of financial abuse without support from the people closest to them. The support group also revealed the long-term impact of family financial abuse on victims' relationships and life choices. Several group members had become hyper-vigilant about financial boundaries, unable to share resources or accept assistance even in appropriate situations. Others had become isolated from family relationships entirely, unable to distinguish between healthy family dynamics and potential manipulation. Working with these victims reinforced my understanding of how important it had been to respond strategically rather than emotionally to Patricia's theft. The victims who had reacted with anger or desperation had often found themselves in cycles of conflict that prevented them from accessing legal remedies or building support systems. Those who had tried to handle the situation privately within the family had often been manipulated into partial restitution or ongoing financial obligations. My methodical approach to documentation and legal action not only protected my financial interests, but had also preserved my emotional well-being and my relationships with supportive family members. The strategy that had initially felt cold and calculated had actually been the most compassionate choice for everyone involved, including Patricia herself. The federal investigation concluded with prosecutions in 12 states and the dismantling of the online forums that had been facilitating family fraud education and coordination. Patricia received an additional federal sentence for her role in coaching other perpetrators, and several of her associates were prosecuted for their own crimes against family members. The victims I worked with through the support groups achieved varying degrees of recovery. Some were able to obtain full financial restitution and rebuild their family relationships on healthier foundations. Others faced ongoing legal battles or chose to prioritize their emotional well-being over financial recovery. All of them benefited from understanding that they were not alone in their experiences and that their reactions to family betrayal were normal responses to abnormal situations. 6 months after the federal investigation concluded, I received a letter from Patricia.
The letter had been screened by authorities to ensure it didn't contain threats or attempts at further manipulation, but I was still surprised by its contents. Rather than the self-serving justifications I had expected, the letter contained what appeared to be a genuine acknowledgement of the harm she had caused.
Patricia wrote about the gambling addiction that had driven her initial financial problems and the shame that had prevented her from seeking appropriate help. She described how her involvement with the fraud network had escalated her criminal behavior and provided her with justifications for increasingly harmful actions. Most importantly, she acknowledged that her attempts to frame her theft as family assistance had been manipulative lies designed to avoid accountability for her choices. The letter included specific acknowledgments of the psychological manipulation she had employed, the planning that had gone into targeting me specifically, and the ongoing harm she had intended to cause through repeated thefts. She expressed understanding of how her actions had affected not only my financial security, but also my trust in family relationships and my sense of personal safety. Patricia's letter didn't ask for forgiveness or attempt to minimize the impact of her actions. Instead, it focused on taking responsibility for the choices she had made and the harm she had caused. She described the addiction treatment and financial counseling she was receiving in prison and her commitment to making different choices when she was released. The letter concluded with Patricia's support for my victim advocacy work and her hope that sharing her methods and mindset might help other potential victims recognize and respond to similar manipulation. She offered to participate in educational programs if her insights could help prevent other people from experiencing what I had endured. I shared the letter with Dr. Vasquez and with Detective Rodriguez, both of whom noted that genuine accountability from perpetrators was rare in family fraud cases. Most offenders continued to justify their actions or blame their victims, even after prosecution and conviction. Patricia's apparent acceptance of responsibility represented genuine progress in her rehabilitation. After careful consideration, I decided to respond to Patricia's letter. My response was brief and focused on acknowledging her accountability while maintaining clear boundaries about any future contact. I thanked her for her honesty about her methods and motivations, which had been helpful in my work with other victims. I also made it clear that while I appreciated her acknowledgement of responsibility, I had no interest in rebuilding a relationship or maintaining ongoing communication. Patricia's response was equally brief and appropriate. She thanked me for my reply and confirmed that she understood and respected my boundaries. She provided contact information for her treatment providers in case her insights could be useful for educational purposes, but she made no requests for personal communication or relationship rebuilding. The exchange provided a sense of closure that I hadn't expected to achieve. Not because Patricia's acknowledgement somehow erased the harm she had caused, but because it confirmed that my strategic response to her manipulation had been effective not only in protecting myself, but also in creating consequences that had led to genuine change in her behavior. A year after Patricia's conviction, Marcus and I celebrated our second wedding anniversary in the home we had purchased with my recovered savings. The house represented more than financial security. It symbolized our ability to build something positive from a destructive experience and our commitment to maintaining the healthy boundaries that protected our relationship from future manipulation. Marcus's healing process had been different from mine, but equally important. Recognizing the extent of his mother's manipulation had required him to re-examine many childhood memories and family dynamics that he had previously accepted as normal. He had sought counseling to process the grief of losing the mother he thought he had known and to develop skills for recognizing and responding to manipulation in other relationships. Our marriage had been strengthened by the experience in unexpected ways. Working together to address Patricia's theft had demonstrated our ability to handle serious challenges as a team. The process of establishing financial boundaries led to deeper conversations about our values, goals, and expectations for our relationship. Most importantly, we had learned to communicate about difficult topics without allowing external pressure to create conflict between us. The victim advocacy work that had grown out of my experience with Patricia became an ongoing part of my life rather than a temporary response to trauma. I continued facilitating support groups, speaking at professional conferences, and consulting with law enforcement agencies about family fraud cases. The work provided meaning to my experience and connected me with a community of professionals and survivors who were working to address a serious but under-recognized problem. One of the most rewarding aspects of the advocacy work was seeing other victims develop the confidence to protect themselves and seek appropriate help. Many of the people I worked with had initially blamed themselves for being manipulated or had accepted partial responsibility for their perpetrators' actions. Through the support group process and educational work, they learned to recognize that sophisticated manipulation was designed to be undetectable and that accountability belongs with the people who chose to commit crimes, not with the people who were victimized. The educational materials I helped develop were implemented by financial institutions, victim advocacy organizations, and law enforcement agencies across multiple states. The materials focused on helping potential victims recognize the warning signs of family financial manipulation and providing practical guidance for documenting and reporting suspected abuse. The prevention work was particularly important because family fraud often went undetected for months or years before victims recognized what was happening. Unlike stranger fraud, which typically involved obvious criminal behavior, family fraud was often framed as assistance or gift-giving, making it difficult for victims to identify the manipulation until significant damage had been done. Working with financial institutions to develop better detection and reporting systems was especially rewarding. Banks and credit unions implemented new procedures for identifying potentially suspicious transactions involving family members, training staff to recognize signs of financial elder abuse and relationship fraud, and providing resources for customers who suspected they were being victimized by people they trusted. The law enforcement training programs focused on helping officers understand the psychological dynamics of family fraud and the barriers that prevented victims from reporting these crimes. Police departments developed specialized protocols for investigating family financial abuse cases and connecting victims with appropriate support services. 2 years after Patricia's conviction, I was invited to testify before a state legislative committee that was considering new laws to address family financial abuse. The proposed legislation would strengthen penalties for financial crimes involving family relationships, provide additional resources for victim recovery, and mandate training for professionals who work with potential victims. My testimony focused on the sophisticated nature of family fraud and the importance of treating these crimes as seriously as other forms of financial abuse. I explained how perpetrators exploit emotional vulnerabilities and family dynamics to commit crimes that can be more devastating than stranger fraud because they destroy trust and family relationships in addition to causing financial harm. The legislation passed with bipartisan support and became a model for similar laws in other states. The new legal framework provided stronger tools for prosecuting family fraud cases and better resources for victim recovery and support. 3 years after my experience with Patricia, I reflected on how profoundly the event had changed my understanding of family relationships, personal boundaries, and the importance of strategic thinking in crisis situations. The theft had been devastating, but my response to it had revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed and connected me with meaningful work that continued to provide purpose and satisfaction. The experience had taught me that protecting yourself from manipulation doesn't require you to become suspicious or cynical about all relationships. Instead, it requires developing the skills to recognize when someone is trying to exploit your trust and the confidence to respond appropriately when that recognition occurs. Most importantly, I had learned that accountability and compassion were not mutually exclusive. Holding Patricia responsible for her actions was the most compassionate choice for everyone involved, including Patricia herself. Enabling her destructive behavior would have ensured that it continued, harming additional victims and preventing her from experiencing the consequences that ultimately led to her recovery. If you are experiencing family financial abuse, please know that you are not alone and that recovery is possible.
The shame and self-blame you may feel are normal responses to abnormal situations, but they don't reflect reality about your worth or your judgment. Sophisticated manipulation is designed to be undetectable, and being victimized by someone you trust doesn't mean you are naive or foolish. You have the right to protect yourself, to seek legal remedies, and to establish boundaries that prevent future abuse. You also have the right to receive support from professionals who understand the unique challenges of family fraud and can help you navigate both the practical and emotional aspects of recovery. Your financial security matters, your emotional well-being matters, and your right to honest relationships matter. No one, regardless of their relationship to you, has the right to exploit your trust for financial gain or to manipulate you into accepting theft as evidence of family loyalty. Recovery from family financial abuse is possible, and there are people and resources available to help you through the process. You deserve relationships built on honesty and respect, and you have the power to create and maintain those relationships even after experiencing betrayal by someone you trusted. 5 years had passed since that devastating discovery on my honeymoon, and I was standing in the auditorium of the National Center for Victim Rights preparing to deliver the keynote address at their annual conference on family financial abuse. The irony wasn't lost on me that the woman who had once been paralyzed by the sight of her empty bank account was now considered a national expert on financial exploitation and recovery. The audience was filled with law enforcement officers, victim advocates, financial counselors, and survivors like myself. As I looked out at their faces, I saw the same determination that had carried me through the darkest period of my life. These were people who understood that healing wasn't just about recovering money, it was about reclaiming agency and rebuilding trust in a world where the people closest to you could become your greatest threat. My speech that day focused on what I called the strategic survivor mindset, the approach that had allowed me not just to recover from Patricia's theft, but to transform that experience into meaningful work that protected others. The key insight I shared was that effective response to family financial abuse required thinking like an investigator rather than reacting like a victim. When someone you trust violates that trust, I told the audience, your first instinct may be to retreat into emotional processing or to try to restore the relationship through forgiveness and understanding. These are natural responses, but they're also exactly what sophisticated manipulators count on to avoid consequences for their actions. I explained how my nursing background had prepared me to respond strategically rather than emotionally, treating the crisis like a medical emergency that required assessment, diagnosis, and systematic treatment rather than hoping the problem would resolve itself through time and goodwill. After my presentation, I was approached by Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a researcher from Stanford University who was conducting a longitudinal study on family fraud recovery. She had been following my case and the cases of other victims I had worked with, tracking long-term outcomes and identifying factors that contributed to successful recovery versus ongoing victimization. Your approach has become something of a gold standard in the field, Dr. Walsh told me. We're seeing consistently better outcomes for victims who adopt strategic documentation and legal response methods compared to those who try to handle family fraud through informal family mediation or emotional appeals. Her research had identified several key factors that predicted successful recovery from family financial abuse. Strategic thinking and systematic documentation were crucial, but equally important was the victim's ability to separate emotional relationships from financial accountability. Victims who maintained that separation were more likely to obtain full restitution and less likely to be re-victimized. The research also revealed the long-term impact of different response strategies on family relationships. Contrary to what many victims feared, pursuing legal accountability actually led to healthier family dynamics over time. Families that addressed financial abuse directly were more likely to establish genuine trust and respect, while families that avoided accountability often experienced ongoing dysfunction and repeated victimization. The victims who prioritize family harmony over accountability don't actually preserve their relationships, Dr. Walsh explained. They just ensure that the dysfunction continues beneath the surface while the perpetrator faces no incentive to change their behavior. This research validated my decision to respond strategically to Patricia's theft rather than trying to handle the situation through family mediation or informal conflict resolution. The legal consequences had not only protected me from further victimization, but had actually created the conditions for Patricia's genuine rehabilitation. As we talked, Dr. Walsh shared some surprising news about Patricia's post-incarceration life. After her release from federal prison 2 years earlier, Patricia had continued the addiction treatment and financial counseling she had begun while incarcerated. She had found work as a bookkeeper for a nonprofit organization serving other people in recovery, and she had been volunteering with programs that provided financial literacy education to at-risk populations. She's actually become quite effective at helping other people recognize and avoid the manipulation techniques she once used, Dr. Walsh said. Her first-hand knowledge of how financial predators think has made her valuable in prevention work. This information stirred complex emotions. I felt satisfaction that the consequences of Patricia's actions had led to genuine change rather than just punishment. At the same time, I remained committed to maintaining the boundaries that protected me from any attempts at relationship restoration. Patricia's rehabilitation was positive for society, but it didn't obligate me to welcome her back into my personal life. Dr. Walsh's visit also brought news about Marcus, who had developed his own expertise in recognizing and responding to family manipulation. His architectural firm had begun offering pro bono services to nonprofit organizations that served abuse survivors, and he had become a volunteer facilitator for support groups serving adult children of manipulative parents. Watching him process his mother's betrayal and develop healthier relationship skills has been remarkable, Dr. Walsh noted. He's become quite effective at helping other people recognize when family loyalty is being weaponized against them. Marcus's healing journey had been different from mine, but equally transformative. Where I had channeled my experience into victim advocacy and policy work, he had focused on helping other people navigate the complex emotions of loving someone who had harmed them. His support group work provided a safe space for people to process the grief of losing the family relationships they thought they had, while building the skills to create healthier dynamics going forward. That evening, Marcus and I attended the conference's awards ceremony, where I was receiving recognition for my contributions to family fraud prevention and victim support. As I accepted the award, I reflected on how profoundly my life had changed since that morning in Cabo when I discovered my empty bank account. The recognition was gratifying, but the real reward was the knowledge that my experience had helped protect other people from similar victimization. The educational materials I had helped develop were being used by financial institutions across the country. The support group model I had co-created was operating in dozens of cities. The legislative testimony I had provided had contributed to stronger laws protecting victims of family financial abuse. Most importantly, the strategic response framework I had developed was helping other victims understand that they had options beyond accepting ongoing victimization or destroying family relationships through emotional confrontation.
The middle path of strategic accountability was giving people tools to protect themselves while preserving the possibility of genuine feeling and relationship restoration. After the ceremony, Marcus and I walked through the downtown area near the conference center, talking about our plans for the future. My victim advocacy work had evolved into a consulting practice that worked with organizations developing policies and procedures for addressing family financial abuse. Marcus's architecture firm was expanding its pro bono work to include facility design for organizations serving abuse survivors. We had found ways to honor our experience with Patricia by using it to protect and help other people, but we had also built a life that wasn't defined by that experience. Our marriage was stronger than it had been before the theft, built on a foundation of genuine trust and shared values rather than naive assumptions about family loyalty. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had handled things differently?" Marcus asked as we paused at a coffee shop near our hotel. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I think the outcome would have been worse for everyone, including your mother. If I had accepted her explanation about family financial dynamics, she would have continued stealing from me and probably from other people. The consequences she faced forced her to confront her addiction and change her behavior." We had learned that accountability and compassion weren't opposing forces, they were complementary aspects of healthy relationships. Holding people responsible for harmful behavior was often the most loving thing you could do, both for them and for the people they might victimize in the future. As we sat in the coffee shop, I pulled out my phone to check messages and found an email from Sarah Martinez, one of the first victims I had worked with through the support group program. Sarah had been targeted by her brother-in-law in Phoenix, losing $23,000 before discovering the theft and struggling with family pressure to avoid legal action. Sarah's email contained exciting news. She had just been hired as a victim advocate with the Arizona Attorney General's office, where she would be working specifically on family financial abuse cases. Her lived experience as a survivor, combined with the strategic thinking skills she had developed through our support group work, made her uniquely qualified to help other victims navigate the complex legal and emotional challenges of family fraud recovery. "Another success story," I told Marcus, showing him Sarah's email. "This was the most rewarding aspect of my advocacy work, seeing other survivors develop the confidence and skills to protect themselves and help others in similar situations." Sarah's career transition represented a broader trend I had observed among family fraud survivors who received appropriate support and developed strategic thinking skills. Rather than being permanently damaged by their experiences, many of them became powerful advocates for other victims and valuable contributors to prevention efforts.
The transformation from victim to advocate wasn't automatic or universal, but it was possible for people who received validation for their experiences, learned that sophisticated manipulation was designed to be undetectable, and developed skills for recognizing and responding to similar situations in the future. As Marcus and I finished our coffee and prepared to return to our hotel, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought us to this point. The theft that had initially seemed like a devastating end to our financial security had actually been the beginning of work that gave profound meaning to our lives. Patricia's manipulation had been designed to leave me feeling powerless and ashamed, isolated from support systems, and convinced that I was responsible for my own victimization. Instead, it had connected me with a community of survivors and professionals who were working to address a serious but under-recognized problem. The strategic approach that had initially felt cold and calculating had actually been the foundation for everything positive that had emerged from our experience. By refusing to be manipulated into silence or shame, by documenting everything systematically, and by pursuing appropriate legal remedies, I had not only protected myself, but had also created a model that other victims could follow. 6 months later, I received a letter that brought our story full circle. The return address showed it was from Patricia, but the tone and content were unlike any of our previous communications. Instead of attempts at manipulation or self-serving justifications, the letter contained something I had never expected: a genuine expression of gratitude. Patricia wrote that she had learned about my advocacy work through the nonprofit organization where she worked, and she wanted me to know that my response to her theft had saved her life. The legal consequences had forced her into treatment programs that addressed not just her gambling addiction, but also the underlying psychological issues that had made her willing to harm people she claimed to love. She described how her work with other people in recovery helped her understand the true impact of her actions and the sophisticated nature of the manipulation techniques she had employed. Working with victims of similar crimes had given her insight into the psychological damage she had caused and the importance of the accountability she had initially resisted. The letter concluded with Patricia's acknowledgement that I had given her the greatest gift possible: the consequences that had forced her to change. She wrote that she understood and respected my boundaries regarding personal contact, but she wanted me to know that my strategic response had created the possibility for her genuine rehabilitation and her current meaningful work protecting other potential victims. I shared the letter with Marcus and with Dr. Vasquez, both of whom noted how rare it was for perpetrators of family financial abuse to develop genuine insight into their behavior and its impact. Patricia's transformation from manipulative predator to effective advocate for victim protection represented the kind of outcome that accountability-based responses could achieve when combined with appropriate treatment and support. As I write this final reflection, 7 years have passed since Patricia's theft first shattered my assumptions about family loyalty and financial security. The work that grew out of that experience continues to evolve and expand, but the core principles remain the same. Strategic thinking protects victims better than emotional reactions. Accountability creates better outcomes than avoidance, and survivors can become powerful advocates for protecting other potential victims. The strategic survivor mindset that I developed in response to family financial abuse has applications far beyond financial crime. It's a framework for maintaining agency and protecting well-being in any situation where someone is trying to manipulate your emotions to gain advantage over you. If you find yourself in a situation where someone you trust is exploiting that trust for their own benefit, remember that you have options beyond accepting ongoing harm or destroying relationships through emotional confrontation. Strategic documentation, appropriate legal action, and consistent boundaries can protect you while preserving the possibility of genuine healing and positive change. Your right to financial security is not negotiable, regardless of family relationships or emotional manipulation. Your responsibility is to protect yourself and to hold others accountable for their choices, not to enable destructive behavior in the name of family loyalty or forgiveness. The most loving thing you can do for someone who is harming you is to ensure that their actions have appropriate consequences. This protects not only you, but also other potential victims, and it creates the conditions where genuine change and healing become possible.
Recovery from family financial abuse is not just about getting your money back. It's about reclaiming your agency, rebuilding your trust in your own judgment, and developing the skills to create and maintain healthy relationships built on genuine respect rather than manipulation and exploitation. You have the strength to protect yourself, the right to seek appropriate help, and the power to transform your experience into something that helps protect others. Your story matters, your recovery matters, and your future matters more than anyone else's comfort with avoiding accountability. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.